Hello, I'm Larry Johnson. Thank you for watching. I'm here at the behest of the International Unity Club, who are creating a great opportunity with the support of TAS to try to open lines of communication between the United States and the Russian people. And as part of that, I'm engaged in dialogues of a variety of prominent Russians representing, believe it or not, a variety of political opinions. And today, fortunate to have Alexander Yushchenko. Alexander, listen, thank you so much for agreeing to sit down and chat with me. I think you were here the other day with the chairman of the Communist Party, correct? So,
yes.
Take me back in terms of your own personal experience, what it was like in 1991 for you when the Soviet Union collapsed and what had been the ruling party, the Communist Party, essentially fell out of favor. What was that like in turn? What was that experience like for you?
I'm going to that last epoch, the youth that we caught at late. I'm born in 1969. Practically, I graded in '87, and I went to the military academy in Mazhaisk military academy, that getting a specialist in a space military machinery. So that was the period when I caught, for me, a happy moments of childhood, youth. When middle school, I graduated under the system of that classical Soviet education that we had. By the way, at certain time, everybody, they copied the leading countries. They said about that it was classical system, Russian system of education that was preparing a person as a whole, a person who would be able to create, to think, to meditate. So going to academy, I soaked everything in that Soviet, that best, otherwise the cream of the crop of the education. I went through the pioneers, I went through the Oktyabryonak, which were the special organizations for kids. Sports to me was accessible. Every yard, every complex we had in a pioneers camp, right, like a Boy Scout camp where I went to the summertime. I took the best. The way I was raised, educated, including with creative potential. So to me, it was a happy childhood. And in 1991, my parents are, my father is a soldier. He went through a different, connected with moving. We moved a lot. I lived in Belarus, I lived Kozelsk, I lived in the Moscow region. And I graduated in Moscow District School. And I moved to Leningrad. And that was my youth. And it was equal to the inheritance that I had. Of course, I had difficulties because military system takes discipline, so education and discipline, they create a certain effect that is required to the state as a military specialist. I want to say that in my course we had all citizens from the whole former USSR, including Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Belarus, and these were people, we were all friends, and Moldavia included. So it was a huge Soviet family raised in certain traditions, calculating in some important military discipline, and we still communicate. Even those who are in Ukraine now, periodically they call me, watching certain security rules, and they tell me, ask questions, they have interest, so they're not, they care about what takes place. And Answering your question, I can tell you, I had a happy life, happy childhood, bright youth, interesting youth, and that gave the impulse to the future selection of my profession. Because falling apart of the Soviet Union, I was already I was graduating from the military school, especially in 1993. I participated among those that were protecting the White House, and it was formulated for the future as a selection of my political activity that I do today. One of the heads of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation, and I work in a fraction in the State Duma. In 1993, that's when I met Zyuganov, and I remember bright speeches that he had. I remember when the country was thrown in different sizes. That's when I met him, and just recently you took an interview from him. I came with him, and my whole political active career is right beside him. Strong, interesting, a great leader.
He is an energetic man, that is for certain. Let me ask you a question about Soviet education, and in contrast to today, if there is any difference. In the West, it was always portrayed that the Soviet education system was one of rigid indoctrination. But what I note, and if you step back and look at it objectively, Russia or the Soviet Union from, say, 1925 to that 30-year period from 1925 to 1955 was a genuine revolution in terms of you went from an agrarian society to an advanced industrial society. You went from a society in which, maybe there was 60% literacy in 1925, may have been less, not much more. By 1955, universal literacy. And Russia was the first to launch an astronaut into space, in contrast to the United States. So what was it about the Soviet education that made it possible to have those kinds of advances?
First of all, we had a great social state after great destruction of the Civil War, when we had a country we had a lot of kids that had no parents. They said Dzerzhinsky did this and that, some repressions, we didn't have those. The basic thing that what Dzerzhinsky did accomplish, that in short terms, he cut down those kids that had no parents that were in the streets. Every kid had an opportunity to get education. For example, my parents, the WWIIs, and my father had 7 brothers and sisters, and after heaviest time, he's born in 1931, before the war.
Okay.
They were all orphans. They had 0 chances with any other situation. If it wouldn't be for the country that built such a great social system to raise the children, care for the children, care for humans. Each one had a graduated degree. Each one is in the society. And examples like this, we have a lot. Number of those examples. Every person had an opportunity at the start to receive a possibility to implement yourself, realize yourself in life. That's educational system. Even when we speak about World War II, that crushed us, where we lost 28 millions.
Yeah.
Even our enemies on Nuremberg process, they said that we lost not just to the Soviet man, we lost to the Soviet commander who was brilliantly prepared. 8 out of 10 people who were attacking Reichstag were either teachers or some all from the Russian Soviet school.
Let me ask you a quick question. So your father and his siblings, their parents died at some point, correct, before World War II?
They were born in 1939, my father. My mother is born in 1941, 20th of June, 2 days before the war started. And her father, my grandfather, he died Belostok, 30th of June, 1941. So in these conditions, practically hardest conditions, but people, my mother, my father, they were formed this way, and they studied, and they put themselves into life, and they were successful due to that, due to our victory, because we were strong, and we showed our strength and our character. Great number of generations of those times, they survived, and they gave life to our generation.
Yeah.
And we give next life to next generation. That was a great credit that the Soviet Union gave us.
But was your father's father also killed in the Great Patriotic War?
Yes, he did. Yes.
Yeah, and I think this is what makes...
They were all orphans. Mama died because she was sick, and practically they were raised at 3-4 years old. They were orphans. Plus war that took away millions of people, relatives.
Yeah.
For these 5 kids, state took them on account. We had millions like that.
Yeah.
My father got an education in Suvorov College, and he became a military. He became a soldier.
Yeah, that is, regardless of political differences among Russians, it is still that common experience of loss of family and the sacrifice of ancestors that still brings Russia together as a country, correct?
It doesn't just unite. World War II, Patriotic War, when we read about it, this material, the chronics, we look at what took place, they were very patriotic. In the first days of war, you know, the shots when the people are looking at the messages about the World War II, that it began from Molotov's words.
Yeah.
You could see tragedy, potential, and a great life that people that desire to protect your motherland. And during the first days, number of people went to the military departments to sign up. Kids were adding age. Teenagers were signing up from 16 to 18, lying, cheating on the paperwork just to be able to go to front line to protect the motherland.
Yeah.
That's internal potential of it's a genetical code, as we call it, of the Soviet people that were protecting the motherland as your own family. So getting into today's word and making like parallels, I think that is what it speaks about. Those traditions laid down. They are very strong, very powerful, and when we face danger, at the threshold of danger, we're really united. We get united.
Go ahead.
And that's the tragedy when all Western powers that were able to divide Ukrainian society, that's also Soviet society, that were raised in the same traditions. Absolutely the same paradigm, same people, same character, same strength, same spirit, same potential, same belief and desire to protect the motherland, to the great Soviet country that was a foundation. And unfortunately, they were able to destroy it cut the line and bring two brothers into fight. It's a tragedy for us.
You're now a member of the Duma. As a member of the Duma, if you had the chance to recommend reforms in the current Russian education, are there things that from the Soviet system you'd recommend be incorporated now into the current system? Or do you think the current system is now, back on track with what helped make the Soviet Union great?
When in 1991, by the way of betrayal, it was a betrayal. Our country, with over 1,000 years of history, you can take us front head. You cannot fight with us. We will take over every war. We will win.
Right.
It's just a history, of our country. Not one battle that took place, we never lost. So they decided to take us just by implementing into the leadership of the country and party the agents of influence that broke. They did everything to break apart the system. The first thing what was done when the former Soviet Union fell apart and Russia got on some kind of liberal oligarch rails under Yeltsin, Gaidar, and others' leadership. First thing they did, they reformed the whole education system. They took away the classical system of education. They broke that gap, and still we have circumstances after that. And the whole generation that was formed based on the education that they brought in 1991, balance system that was raised on, that is forming a clip mindset. They don't let you study deep into the subject, doesn't allow you to create the art personality, the creative personality, and we have a generation that lost their opportunities. That's the 90s. Now, not only we offer, but we are constantly offering the Communist Party, putting in the law about education for all that brings back that old and better system and perfected system with the new things that we have now that's supposed to raise artistic personality, a person who can love, think, read, talk, argue, and that is something that countries should be interested in. And yes, due to what we have, our country with the leadership of President Putin, they selected a way for sovereignty. That is our offer concerning the education. It will find its response and will break through that wall and create a better system of education and will reach coming back the classical system of education.
Okay. In the United States, they tend to describe Russia currently as an authoritarian dictatorship. So if I was to put you on the plane with me on my way back to America and we stopped off in Washington, D.C., and could go talk to President Trump, what would you tell him about that claim that Russia is governed by an authoritarian dictatorship?
First of all, if we get back a little bit backwards, we did not start any conflict. I cannot fly with you. I am a state political representative. I'm a representative. I'm a deputy, but I cannot fly with you.
But I'm speaking hypothetically.
The first thing, we did not start that when we spoke, what the conflict started from. Until it started from today, there's a number of requests for left ideas. In a global capital world, the first thing is to fight with the left ideas. Labor and capital are the biggest fights that there are. And what does it start with? First, We go after the representatives of left ideas, communists, and then there's internal repression at the example of Kiev. And as a conclusion, then they start aggression. This is the scheme that takes place all over the world. Who implemented that scheme? Mainly these ideologies of the West, and that is ideology of the United States at the foundation. The first thing I've asked if I would talk to Mr. Trump, I'd probably ask him, I've heard from your mouths many times the peace talks. You say a lot of things, you do a lot of in the media sphere for the peace to be in the whole world, but we don't see any actions, no implementation of the words or realization of the words that you say. I would like to first thing to say that pay attention, that the result must be more important than the process. When we have a media sphere that is overruling over the real life, and it becomes a first and foremost, and people put into the process a lot more than the result. I want to see results. I want to see the powerful country as United States with a great potential would take, not care or just overtake the whole world with their global presence and financial influence, but would put into their potential and working over the real world, real peace. We have a great leadership championship, leaders of Russia, and I'm overruling that championship. And I have it's Katya Lychova, it's a person. She is most famous person from the Soviet Union. At 8 years old, she was sent by the Soviet country to meet President Reagan. Remember that girl who spoke about peace and answering Samantha Smith, who addressed Andropov. I think it was the best and biggest step with maybe a child, being naive as a child, has a great potential and a great steps towards peace. So it's interesting. What would I hear as an answer from Mr. Trump? A lot of talks, but not much business.
I think President Trump would be surprised to learn that there are different political views in Russia, that Russia is not a monolith, that the party that supports President Putin is different from, the Communist Party. And yet you're still free to express your ideas and to debate in the Duma and to even challenge policies of the president, though I will note that with respect to the special military operation, it looks like all political parties have been united behind the president's policy in pursuing the goal of demilitarization of Ukraine and denazification. Is that a fair summary?
Well, first of all, Communist Party in the Russian Federation, it's an opposition party.
What do you mean by opposition party? What does he mean by opposition party?
It's a party that based not on some kind of critique on the small things, but we have principle, different point of view, how to form and implement the program, budget programs. We have offered a program that very different from what we have. It's our internal question, and we discuss it, we argued. We had a very interesting meeting for the budget for the next 3 years in Duma. The leader of the party, Zyuganov, he criticized the budget and offered 1, 2, 3, 4. You can agree to it, and then we give the alternative that in current challenges in a global war, and that's what takes place in the hybrid war is already taking place now. It will allow us to answer all these challenges. So in this area, we're representatives of the opposition party. We have certain misunderstandings, but we will solve it inside our political field, political area, in a framework of a political argument concerning external policies. Outside of our country, we have a choice now. And a country, when it is in this condition, nobody chooses anything. We are united. We are one body. We, as one body, have to answer the aggression. We clearly understand why it all takes place. And if we talk about getting into, it's not just on words, but it has to be that the state would protect it, that the state would do anything possible, its internal policies, and it's not separated from the other policies. So you can't tear one from the other apart. If there's a war going on, everybody has to fight.
If you had the power to implement one objective of your particular political party, what would that be?
President Putin said that, and everybody cited him, that important phrase, that capitalism isn't a dead end. There are two ways of development, either socializing or fascists. So it's either we build social state with a care for people, forming for people to be proud of their country and assured in tomorrow's day about the job, about good salary and pension. Not worry about the education appraisal of their children. That's the main objective of our state, of any country. Teach, protect. This is the basics that is in our program, the victory program that was offered, that we have. And the first thing that is forming a budget, a development. And you cannot do that without nationalizing certain strategic plans, industry branches, resources. You cannot do that. And then it has to be fair taxes. Poor have to pay less, rich have to pay more. So the program is published on the website, and it was at many voting, at many elections, president's campaign. People today are actively answering and supporting this program to implement it.
Yeah.
Now that's a political struggle, that's a political fight.
I wish we had a time machine that we could go back to, the year I was born, 1955, pick up the American leaders, pick up the Soviet leaders, and bring them to 2025, so that they can see 70 years later how different the world looks. Because as I grew up as a child of the Cold War, well before your time, there was always the presumption of the superiority of the capitalist system, the superiority of the United States, and how the Soviet system was impoverished. In the Soviet stores, you didn't have much choice, not plentiful amounts of food, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if they showed up today and looked, they would see in the United States incredible disparities in wealth, small number of, oligarchs. They want to call them, in the capitalist West, we clean it up. We call them billionaires or capitalists, not oligarchs. In Russia, it's oligarch, bad. But at the same time, the the number of homeless people that are on the streets in the capitalist cities outnumber the numbers that are here in Moscow, even though Moscow is no longer a communist society. The illiteracy rate in the United States has fallen to 79%. It went from 96, 97, it's fallen by almost 20 points. And so what I'm pointing out is that we were schooled at this inevitable march of capitalism to make everybody wealthy and make society better, has now been, I think, empirically shown to not be the case. And in contrast to that, we look at not just Russia, but more importantly, I think China, with the transformation that's taken place in that society, where they have raised the level of economic success. They've actually created a genuine middle class, one that didn't exist before. What do you think would be the reaction of the Soviet officials from the 50s if they showed up today in 2025? What would they be saying?
You have named the Cold War period. I was there also. It was my childhood, my youth, and I remember how it took place, and I remember what movies we had. Many things that mass media, informational channels, they were formed. They paid a big influence onto the point of view of people. And against our country, we had a huge potential against these media structures, certain channels, mass media, that, they had to, you have to say that they were stronger than us. The Western countries were stronger than us. So these media systems were taken over, and they were having big influence on our country. In this matter, yes, but there was no propaganda. Even in today's situation, they blame us. You have propaganda. You have against West. You have great against West countries. No, we don't do that. Look, I give you an example. 3.5 million. They invited people to invest their money into the current companies. We've invested money through our deposits that it was like 3.5 million people of our country that had relatives, children, loved ones. We received 10 millions of citizens who were just, they were just dropped in the money. Otherwise, they cheated them financially. They froze the money. $60 billion. So there are no propaganda, and due to that information, this is what kind of attitude we have. This is a regular topic. Going back to China, that was under Communist Party, they found a formula how to implement economical potential and took off for the last 20, 30 years. They made a huge leap in the development. And today, they're leading on the potential of the Soviet country and became a number 2 center of the world economy. And I can speak about recently I went to Korea. You can tell it's a, center of hell, but it's a beautiful, dynamically developing country. You have over 50 years of under greater sanctions, but they found forms of how to implement life. They have happy life, healthy life, happy pension life, and the people see that they're happy, they're satisfied, and a love for their country. Now, that also forms by media, and until you see it with your own eyes, until you experience it, it's hard to believe it. So if you get back to those 50s, and your question that was to how possible it is then to not to bring to today what we have. Again, we get back to the classics of Mr. Lenin, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. He said that labor against capital. All world wars, they started from the crisis. First war was because of the crisis, second war because of the world crisis, and now financial speculative capitalism got into the very tough conditions in terms for debts, into the crisis, and as an outcome, aftermath, they try to come out of it with the hands and help of the military conflict and a huge world opposition as a war in the Third World War, which we cannot allow to happen.
Let me just take you, well, closing out here. I'm just curious, though, as you were growing up, you mentioned films, movies that affected, colored your view of the Cold War. Were any of those movies out of the United States? Were they American movies at all?
You know, if you put if you be honest, all movies concerning Cold War, they were all American. They were primitive, absolutely flat in the beginning. If you take a couple of them, like I've watched the Americans made in the end of 80s and beginning of 90s, very primitive movies. Everybody, all movies from our filmmakers, they were directly to different things. For upraising the soul, for internal harmony for the society. Even read Moscow Doesn't Believe Tears. It had an Oscar. Greatest movie that you can watch and watch and watch many times.
Which one is that?
Moscow Does Not Believe the Tears.
Oh, okay. What about, did you ever watch War Games? The one with Matthew Broderick, or Matthew, he was a young kid he got into a computer game and had tried to start a nuclear exchange with Russia.
Never watched it. I watched probably of the Cold War.
How about Star Wars?
Of course, yes, definitely. And the tragedy is of the American movie-making industry, classical industry, that I think is very powerful. They have great movies. They refuse today. It's hard to find a movie that was released, a good quality movie in a Hollywood that you can be proud of. You don't have movies like that anymore, like that would get into our heart, under our skin, including our movies is also behind those classical Soviet movie-making industry where we were raised.
And we'll close with this. Did you ever see the movie Reds? Reds?
Yes, Reds.
Yeah, it was a movie about the...
You know, having big money and having the biggest profit from the movie-making industry always goes into minus to the internal content. In Soviet Union, we never had an objective to make most money from the movie and rent it out at the most money. Yeah, that was never the goal. Of course, we had fantastic comedies, unique stories, drama stories, historical movies, but I have never seen in Soviet movies aggression against other countries. I've never seen that. Unfortunately, the movies of the late period of Cold War or the Hollywood, they were full of aggression, full of hate for Soviet Union, just
well, I think
Rocky and others, Rambo and others.
Yeah, I think they like to make the Soviets the villain in many. The movie Reds was about John Reed, the American that came and was part of the revolution in 1917. Had Diane Keaton in it as well.
Yeah, that's a known movie. Yes, I remember it now. Yes, I watched it. Old movie, old classical movie that was probably filling up that great pages of the great movie-making industry.
Alexander, listen, thank you for taking this time. I appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Спасибо.
Yeah, we're